The clatter of silverware and the low hum of conversation filled the elegant Italian restaurant in downtown New York. Dim chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths, where couples, businessmen, and families enjoyed their meals. Ethan Carter, a 26-year-old waiter, moved between tables with practiced ease, refilling wine glasses and delivering steaming plates of pasta. He had been working at La Bella Vita for 3 years, long enough to recognize regulars and anticipate their needs before they even asked. But nothing about this night felt routine. At a corner table, a distinguished-looking man in his late 50s, dressed in an expensive navy blue suit, suddenly gasped. His hand shot to his throat. His eyes bulged with panic. His chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor as he tried to stand, but his knees buckled. Gasps and murmurs spread like wildfire through the restaurant. Some people stood, others remained frozen. Unsure of what to do, Ethan's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he dropped the tray he was holding, sending a glass of red wine crashing onto the floor. He sprinted toward the man. "Sir, can you breathe?" Ethan asked urgently. No response. The man's lips were turning blue, he's choking. Years of training as a waiter had included basic first aid, but he had never needed to use it until now. Ethan positioned himself behind the man, wrapped his arms around his torso, and delivered a sharp, upward thrust to his abdomen. Nothing. The man's wife shrieked. "Oh my God! Somebody do something!" Ethan adjusted his grip and tried again. 1, 2, 3 thrusts. Then, with a violent cough, the obstruction, a large piece of steak, shot out of the man's mouth and onto the table. He collapsed against his chair, gasping for air. The restaurant erupted into applause. People clapped, some even whistled, while others recorded the moment on their phones. The man took deep, shaky breaths, his color slowly returning. He turned his head toward Ethan, his eyes filled with something between gratitude and shock. You saved my life," the man whispered. Ethan, still catching his breath, smiled. "Just doing my job, sir." He had no idea that this single act of courage was about to change his life forever. The restaurant gradually returned to normal, but Ethan still felt the adrenaline rushing through his veins. His heart pounded in his chest as he picked up the tray he had dropped earlier. A few customers patted him on the back as he passed by, whispering words of admiration. "That was incredible," his manager, Tony, said as he approached. "I've never seen anyone act so fast." Ethan chuckled nervously. "I just reacted." Tony shook his head. "No, you saved that man's life. That's not something people forget." Ethan turned to see the man he had rescued still sitting at the table, his wife gripping his arm tightly. The man, now composed, pulled out a sleek black business card and gestured for Ethan to come over. "Son, what's your name?" the man asked. "Ethan Carter, sir." "I'm Richard Langford." He slid the card across the table toward Ethan. "Call me tomorrow morning. I'd like to thank you properly." Ethan hesitated before taking the card. It was thicker than normal business cards with a gold embossed logo at the top. It simply read, "Richard Langford, CEO of Langford Industries Private Line. 212, 555-3498. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had heard of Langford Industries, a multi-billion-dollar real estate and investment firm. Richard Langford was one of the wealthiest men in the city. "You don't have to do that, sir," Ethan said politely. "I was just doing what anyone else would have done." Richard's wife, Eleanor, shook her head. "No, Ethan, not everyone would have acted as fast as you did. You saved my husband's life." She gave her husband a pointed look. "And when Richard makes a promise, he keeps it." Ethan nodded, tucking the card into his apron. "All right, I'll call." As he walked back to the kitchen, his co-workers bombarded him with praise. "Dude, you just saved a billionaire," one of the bartenders whispered. "You think he's going to give you a fat tip?" Ethan laughed. "I doubt it." But as he continued with his shift, he couldn't shake the feeling that Richard Langford had something much bigger in mind, that he had no idea just how much his life was about to change. The next morning, Ethan sat on the edge of his small studio apartment's bed, staring at the black business card in his hands. He had turned it over at least a dozen times, wondering if he should actually make the call. "What's the worst that could happen?" he muttered to himself. Taking a deep breath, he dialed the number. IT rang once. Twice. Then Richard Langford. The voice was smooth and authoritative. Mr. Langford? This is Ethan Carter. From the restaurant last night. A pause, then an enthusiastic reply. Ethan, I was hoping you'd call. Listen, I'd love to meet with you today. Can you come by my office in an hour? Ethan blinked in surprise. That fast? He wasn't exactly dressed for a meeting with a billionaire, but he wasn't about to say no. Sure. I'll be there. Langford's office was in a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of Manhattan. As Ethan stepped inside, he was instantly out of place among the suits and designer dresses moving through the lobby. He smoothed down his best button-up shirt, one he usually saved for interviews, and walked to the receptionist's desk. Mr. Langford is expecting you, the woman said with a polite smile before leading him to a private elevator. When the doors opened, Ethan stepped into an office that could have belonged to a king. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, and modern leather furniture filled the space. Behind an enormous mahogany desk sat Richard Langford, looking much healthier than the night before. Ethan, good to see you. Langford stood and extended his hand. Ethan shook it, still feeling out of his depth. Thanks for inviting me, sir. Langford gestured for him to sit. Let's get straight to the point. You saved my life, Ethan, and I don't take that lightly. Ethan shifted in his chair. Really, Mr. Langford, I didn't do it expecting anything in return. Langford smirked. That's exactly why I want to help you. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Tell me, Ethan, what's your dream? Ethan blinked. My dream? Yes. If money weren't an issue, what would you do with your life? Ethan hesitated. No one had ever asked him that before. He had been too busy working 2 jobs just to keep the bills paid. I've always wanted to open my own restaurant, he admitted. A small place, nothing fancy. Just a spot where people could get good food and feel at home. Langford nodded, as if considering something. Then he smiled. How would you feel if I made that happen? Ethan froze. What? Langford leaned back. I want to invest in you, Ethan. You have integrity, quick thinking, and a good heart. People like you deserve a chance. So, here's my offer. I'll fund your restaurant, mentor you, and give you the resources to make your dream a reality. Ethan felt his world tilt. This had to be a joke. I don't know what to say, he stammered. Say yes, Langford replied, his eyes twinkling. Ethan swallowed hard. This was an offer too good to be true. But was it real? Ethan's mind was spinning. He sat frozen in his chair, staring at Richard Langford as if he had just spoken in another language. You want to fund my restaurant? Ethan finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Langford chuckled. I know it sounds unbelievable, but I'm completely serious. Ethan leaned forward. But why? You don't even know me. Langford's expression softened. Ethan, I've spent my life building an empire, and I've met thousands of people. Most of them are after something. You, however, acted out of kindness with no expectation of reward. That tells me everything I need to know. Ethan exhaled, still struggling to process the moment. I don't even know where to begin with something like this, Langford smirked. That's where I come in. I won't just throw money at you. I'll mentor you, connect you with the right people, and make sure you succeed. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. This was insane. Less than 24 hours ago, he was a broke waiter trying to make rent. Now he was sitting in a billionaire's office, being offered the opportunity of a lifetime. You're hesitating, Langford observed. What's holding you back? Ethan hesitated. I guess I'm afraid it's too good to be true. Langford nodded. That's fair, but let me ask you something. If you walk away from this now, where will you be a year from today? Ethan swallowed hard. He knew the answer. He'd still be waiting tables, struggling to pay his bills, and watching his dreams slip further away. Langford leaned forward. Opportunities like this don't come around twice, Ethan. All I need from you is a yes. Ethan inhaled sharply. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he extended his hand. Yes, he said firmly. Langford grinned and shook his hand. Welcome to your future. As Ethan walked out of the skyscraper, his heart pounded in his chest. He had just said yes to changing his entire life, and he had no idea what came next. Ethan barely slept that night. His mind buzzed with possibilities, fears, and an overwhelming sense of excitement. Was this real? Was he really about to step into a world he had only dreamed of? The next morning, his phone buzzed with a message from Langford. "Meet me at 10 a.m. We're taking the first step." Ethan arrived at an upscale office building downtown, a stark contrast to the modest diner he had worked at. The receptionist greeted him warmly and directed him to the top floor, where Langford was waiting in a sleek, glass-walled conference room. "Ethan," Langford greeted with a smile. "Ready for your crash course in business?" Ethan nodded, still feeling out of place. "I hope so." Langford gestured to the seat across from him. "Good? Because the first step is education. Passion alone isn't enough. You need to know how to run a restaurant, manage costs, hire the right people, and market yourself." Over the next few hours, Langford laid out the fundamentals: how to secure permits, create a business plan, and structure a menu that balanced cost and quality. Ethan scribbled notes furiously, absorbing every word at the end of the session. Langford slid a thick file toward him. "This is everything you need to get started. Now, tell me, do you have a vision for your restaurant?" Ethan hesitated. He had dreamed of this for so long, but now that it was happening, putting it into words felt daunting. I want to create a place where people feel at home," he said finally. "A place with great food, but also warmth. A restaurant that isn't just about meals, but about memories." Langford nodded approvingly. "That's a solid foundation. Now, let's find you the right location." Ethan's heart pounded. This was really happening. Ethan followed Langford through the bustling streets of the city, his pulse quickening with every step. The billionaire had arranged for a real estate agent to show them a few potential restaurant locations. Their first stop was a small, outdated space tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The moment Ethan stepped inside, he wrinkled his nose at the musty smell and peeling wallpaper. Langford arched an eyebrow. "Thoughts?" Ethan shook his head. "It doesn't feel right." Langford smirked. "Good. You're learning already. A restaurant needs atmosphere. Let's move on." The second location was in a trendy district, surrounded by high-end boutiques and coffee shops. It had sleek, modern interiors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and plenty of foot traffic that Ethan's eyes lit up. "This place is incredible." Langford, however, was less impressed. "It's beautiful, but rent here is astronomical. You'd struggle to turn a profit in your first year." Ethan frowned. He hadn't even thought about that. There was more to this than just picking a nice place. Finally, they arrived at the third location, a cozy corner lot near a popular park. The space was charming, with rustic brick walls, an open kitchen layout, and a patio area perfect for outdoor dining. Ethan stepped inside, inhaling the lingering scent of fresh bread from the bakery that had once occupied the space. It felt right. Langford watched him closely. "You like this one?" Ethan nodded slowly. "It's perfect. It's inviting, warm. I can see families coming here, people gathering for a good meal. It fits my vision." Langford smiled. "Then let's make it happen." By the end of the day, the lease negotiations had begun. Ethan wasn't just dreaming anymore. He was building something real. Securing the location was only the beginning. As the days passed, Ethan quickly realized that starting a restaurant wasn't just about cooking good food. It was a battlefield of logistics, budgeting, and problem-solving. The first major challenge? Renovations. The space had potential, but it needed work. The flooring was worn, the kitchen equipment outdated, and the walls needed fresh paint. Langford had given him a budget, but Ethan soon realized that money disappeared faster than he expected. "I thought 20 grand would be enough for renovations," Ethan groaned, looking at the quote from the contractor. "This is double that." Langford chuckled. "Welcome to the real world. Now, what's your plan?" Ethan exhaled. He wasn't going to fail before he even opened. He had to think smart. Instead of hiring expensive contractors for everything, he found local tradesmen willing to do the job for a fair price. He even rolled up his sleeves and helped with painting and minor repairs that wasn't easy. There were days when he felt completely overwhelmed, but every stroke of paint, every repaired chair, brought him one step closer to his dream. With renovations underway, Ethan turned his focus to crafting the perfect menu that he wanted: something simple but memorable. Food that made people feel at home. He spent hours in his tiny apartment kitchen, experimenting with different recipes. But there was a problem. Every dish needed to be cost-effective without sacrificing quality. Too much shrimp, Langford said, tasting one of Ethan's creations. Seafood dries up costs. Ethan groaned. But it's so good. Find a way to balance the price, or switch it out, Langford advised. A restaurant can't survive on passion alone. You need profit. Ethan adjusted, reworking dishes, testing new flavors. He invited friends to sample his food, gathering feedback. Finally, after weeks of trial and error, he had a menu that was both delicious and financially sustainable. The next challenge? Finding the right staff. Ethan posted job listings and held interviews, but finding people who shared his passion wasn't easy. Some candidates were experienced, but had bad attitudes. Others were enthusiastic, but lacked skills that he was about to settle for a mediocre chef when Langford stopped him. Never settle, the billionaire warned. Your restaurant is only as good as the people running it. Find those who care as much as you do. Ethan took the advice to heart. He waited, interviewed more people, and finally he found them. His team, that a talented young chef eager to prove himself, that a warm, friendly waitress who made customers feel at home, that a dishwasher with a tough past, but an incredible work ethic. They weren't just employees, they were family. As the grand opening neared, Ethan barely slept. There was so much to do, so many details to perfect. But when he stepped back and looked at what he had built, the transformed restaurant, the carefully crafted menu, the team standing beside him, he felt something he had never felt before. Pride that he wasn't just a waiter anymore, that he was a restaurant owner. The day had arrived. Ethan stood outside the restaurant, his heart pounding as he watched people gather. The lights glowed warmly, the sign above the door gleamed, and the scent of freshly prepared dishes filled the air. That a year ago, he was a struggling waiter. Now he was about to welcome customers into his own restaurant. Langford stood beside him, arms crossed. Nervous? Ethan chuckled. Terrified? Good, Langford said. That means you care. With a deep breath, Ethan stepped forward and unlocked the doors. The moment the doors opened, customers flooded in, locals curious about the new place. Friends and former colleagues who had come to support him. Even a few food bloggers who had caught wind of the billionaire's involvement. That Ethan's staff jumped into action. Orders were taken, dishes were plated, and drinks were poured. Everything was moving fast, too fast. The kitchen fell behind. A server mixed up 2 orders. The pressure mounted. Ethan didn't panic. He had been on the other side before, and he knew what had to be done. He jumped in. He called out orders, helped plate dishes, and reassured his team. Breathe, he told his young chef. We're in this together. Slowly, things began to flow. Customers were smiling. The food was being praised. The restaurant was alive. Just as Ethan caught his breath, the doors swung open again. Gasps spread through the room. A man in an expensive suit walked in, followed by reporters. That IT was Langford's billionaire friend, the one Ethan had saved. The man smiled, stepping forward. I came to see if the food was as good as the service. Ethan grinned. I hope we don't disappoint. The billionaire was led to a table, where he ordered Ethan's signature dish. That'd be why the time he took the first bite, the entire restaurant was watching. That he chewed, paused, smiled. Then he turned to a reporter and said, "This is the best meal I've had in years." The crowd erupted into applause. As the night came to an end, Ethan finally exhaled. The grand opening had been a success. Langford walked over, clapping him on the back. You did it. Ethan smiled. We did it. Then the billionaire he had saved stood up. He pulled something from his pocket and walked over to Ethan. Got a small envelope. Confused, Ethan took it and opened it. Inside was a signed check, a reward for his good deed. But when Ethan saw the amount, his breath hitched. $0.1 million. That he looked up, stunned. I can't accept this. The billionaire shook his head. You didn't hesitate to help me when I was just another customer. You saved my life without expecting anything in return. Consider this an investment in your future. Tears burned in Ethan's eyes. He had struggled for so long, and now everything was different. This was only the beginning. Ethan had started as a waiter, saving a man's life without thinking twice. That one moment of kindness had led him here, to his dream, his own restaurant, and a future brighter than he ever imagined. Because sometimes The smallest act of kindness can change everything.